Hey y'all. So recently, something interesting happened. I actually ended up in a key with another Demonology Warlock, which isn't something that happens a lot. Destruction is overall considered better for Mythic Plus, so whenever I see another Warlock, they're generally playing that. And I only really went demo because it's a Tyrannical week, and, maybe the other Warlock had the same idea. Anyway, this Warlock was almost identically geared to me, and they performed absolutely wonderfully. However, there was still actually a noticeable DPS discrepancy between us, and I went into details to see what might have caused this. It wasn't for like a pride reason or like talking bad about them or whatever, but I just wanted to see if I could learn anything interesting. So I pulled up the comparison window and I started looking into anything that stood out, and here's my main takeaway summed up in a single sentence. When it comes to Implosion, quality over quantity. Timing Implosion is more important now more than ever. With the way it got a huge buff with Warlock 4-piece, knowing how to correctly and efficiently use Implosion is super important in keys. And the main thing that I learned is timing it correctly is way more important than using it frequently. And this is super evident in this picture. My stats are on the left and the other players are on the right. You can see that I cast Implosion less than half the number of times that the other player did, but it did the exact same amount of damage, and almost the exact same number of total hits. And you might look at this and say, so big whoop. If they cast it more often, but I cast it more specifically, and we still did the same amount of damage, like what's the difference? Why does it matter? Well, the difference is in this graph. This is the comparison between number of uses and damage of Fell Firebolt for myself and the other player. My Wild Imps did more than double the amount of damage that theirs did, despite my Implosions doing the exact same amount of damage. This is where a huge amount of the discrepancy in our DPS on the original graph comes from. By casting Implosion so often, the other player costs themselves a huge amount of passive DPS coming from Imps just shooting their little spells. And I failed to mention one thing until now. The one difference in our build was our legendaries. The other player was using Implosive Potential while I was using Wilfred's Sigil. This, explains their motivation to use Implosion super often to gain the huge haste buff from their legendary. But even though their legendary was rewarding them for doing it, they still fell behind in damage purely because their imps didn't get to deal as much. So if Implosion timing is more important than quantity, when should you use it? I put together a little guide. So, number 1, never implode in single target. The damage you gain from throwing imps that have stopped casting isn't worth the damage you lose from throwing full health imps. It kind of evens out. Also, the malicious imps from your 4-piece deal their damage on death to your primary target anyway, so you're not really losing out on that either. It's not worth doing. Number 2 is don't implode when Demonic Tyrant is off cooldown. When you're waiting for your cooldowns to line up so that you can get a bunch of extra damage out of demonic consumption, just don't implode. You want as many imps alive as possible when Tyrant comes out, so you get as big a buff as possible to your Tyrant. Number 3 is implode after Tyrant expires. This is always when you'll have the most imps available, especially the most malicious imps, the special ones from your cheer set. You'll get the most value by using Implosion pretty soon after Tyrant expires, as long as the next one's also true, which is only implode when From the Shadows is applied. With Warlock 2-piece, the new optimal talent build looks like this. You're taking Dreadlash and From the Shadows. From the Shadows is a 20% Shadow Flame damage buff after Dreadbite, and Implosion deals Shadow Flame damage. So only implode when From the Shadows is applied to the group, either from Call Dreadstalkers or a Carnivorous Stalkers proc. If you follow these general guidelines, your Implosions will be pretty optimal. Practice having good awareness of how many imps you have and how many enemies there are in the pack you're fighting, and you'll start to learn and know when it's a good time to implode. Thanks so much for watching. I plan on uploading another guide soon, a simple demo lock primer for 9.2. A lot has changed since my last guide, and I made a lot of errors in it, so I want to update and correct it just for the current state of the game. Leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you around Azeroth.